Welcome back to the Kaspa Silver YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about something called a power law. And this power law supposedly can predict Kaspa and Bitcoin's price. And I know we don't really talk about price here on this channel, but what's significant about this is that this power law, which is based on math, only applies to Kaspa and Bitcoin in the whole entire crypto space. So to begin, let's get into this article that basically explains this about Kaspa. This article is titled Bitcoin and Kaspa, Not Your Regular Crypto, and it was written by someone called Chancellor. Disclaimer to start off, obviously, nothing in this article is financial advice. This should be obvious. Any price predictions are never financial advice. These are not guaranteed at all. And we're actually going to get into why even this power law is something that is not guaranteed at all. But to begin, what is a power law? A power law is simply a mathematical function that maps input values X on the horizontal axis in figure 1 to output values Y on the vertical axis in figure 1. And then it applies more of these equations here, which personally, I haven't done math in a very long time, especially this kind of math. And I don't really want to get too deep into that. But basically, this is dealing with logs, and logs are exponential lines. Exponential lines look like this. And these figures here pretty much show these exponential lines. So basically, this power law is grabbing a specific mathematical equation that creates an exponential line, and this exponential line is predicting where the price should be at different times in certain years. So let's talk about the problem with log linear graphs. Nonetheless, in case of the Bitcoin price, having time on a logarithmic scale feels unnatural since time seems to progress linear to us, which is probably one of the reasons that the log linear rainbow chart became popular. So if you don't know what that's talking about, Bitcoin has this rainbow chart here that basically is predicting the tops and the bottoms, and usually whenever it's in this blue color, that means you're pretty much in the accumulation zone, and anytime it's in this red color, then that means you're pretty much close to the top. This is built because the power law is just never really accurate, and sometimes people actually shift it to basically make it seem like it's accurate. But if you stick to these exponential lines here, you could pretty much kind of predict where Bitcoin's going to be in certain different time frames. You can also see here that it says whenever new price data comes out, the model can be adapted to it and it will be difficult to detect, as long as only the graph is shown and not the underlying formula. Consequently, the creator can claim a valid model indefinitely. In contrast, while straight line on a log graph can be easily adjusted in terms of slope and intercept, once the data no longer follows a power law, it is no longer a straight line and the model breaks. So now let's take a look at the Bitcoin power law, and it says figure 3 shows the Bitcoin price together with its lower and upper trend lines on a linear, log linear, and log graph. The legend shows the power law functions that define the lower and upper trend lines, with X replaced by year 2009 for ease of use, 2009 being the year where Bitcoin was created. And then what they do is basically just apply that year into the formula to form this exponential line based on logs. And it says that Bitcoin's price should be between 27K and $223,000. And obviously, this is not going to give you an accurate, perfect price prediction. It's basically just going to be ranges that it should be in. Whenever the price hits the lower trend line, which it does a lot, meaning basically this blue color down here, it seems there are no more sellers left and the remaining holders are all long-term holders, or so-called diamond hands hodlers. This is why the lower trend line can be seen as the true adoption trend line. Whenever the price gets close to the upper trend line, which it only does at the peaks of the 4-year halving cycle, there are no more buyers, speculators left, and there's only one direction left for the price to go. Interestingly, the upper and lower trend lines converge. And if you put the formulas in Google, you could see here that this is how the exponential lines look, where you have the top and the bottom lines, and eventually they go together. When these two lines eventually cross over, It says here, can show us that these trend lines intersect around July 2138, and that is very close to the year 2140, at which the last Bitcoin is mined and Bitcoin supply inflation becomes truly zero. Is that a coincidence? Before we try to answer that, let's look at Kaspa first. So now he's going to get into Kaspa. I'm actually going to read this because he gives a very just quick general breakdown of Kaspa, and then he'll go into Kaspa's power law. So he says, as far as I know, Kaspa is the only other crypto whose price follows a power law. Kaspa is very similar to Bitcoin, proof of work, fair launch, end of 2021, but its unique selling point is a transaction speed limit, which ultimately will be approximately 3 orders of magnitude higher, which is achieved by not using a blockchain like Bitcoin does, but by using a block DAG. The paper Phantom Ghost DAG, a scalable generalization of Nakamoto consensus, explains the main ideas behind Kaspa and is worth a read if you're a bit technically oriented. Interestingly, as the title already suggests, Kaspa is actually a generalization of Bitcoin. It introduces a concept called the maximum K cluster that is used to mark a set of well-connected blocks in the graph for which the size of the anticone of each of those blocks outside of the history and future of those blocks, is provably limited to K. When K is set to 0, Kaspa block DAG basically collapses to Bitcoin's blockchain, where no parallel blocks are allowed and therefore can only be operated securely on the assumption of slow block creation, only 1 block per 10 minutes instead of 1 and soon 10 blocks per second for Kaspa. To keep node storage requirements low, the trade-off is that transaction history is kept only for 3 days for regular nodes instead of up till the Genesis block like Bitcoin does, while only keeping the full UTXO database next to it. While not needed for proper operation, but for the sake of traceability and proof of fairness, there is a collection of archival nodes that keep the full block DAG and transaction history till Genesis. Kaspa is an ancient Aramaic word for silver, which is how it's meant to be used, not as a direct competitor to Bitcoin, synonymous to a digital store of value, but as means of exchange like silver was in the past. And I love the fact that he actually mentions here that it's not to be a direct competitor to Bitcoin, because it's not. Kaspa is meant to be used, and Bitcoin is more encouraged to just be hodled basically forever. So now let's get into the Kaspa power law. Figure 4 shows the Kaspa price with its power law trend lines on a linear log, linear, and log-log graph, similar to figure 3 for Bitcoin. Usually, altcoins move in tandem to Bitcoin, and since Bitcoin has been in a bear market for the past 2 years or so, it's quite surprising that Kaspa has been making these huge gains. Yeah, and if you don't already know, if you've been a Kaspa holder for the last 2 years, Kaspa has completely defied the bear market, and it basically never experienced the bear market. It was just in its own bull run since inception. Figure 5 shows that according to the trend lines, Kaspa price will reach $1 halfway 2026, earliest, and end of 2027 latest, and it will reach $10 in 2034, earliest, and 2036 the latest. At the time of writing, one Kaspa trades at 10 cents. Note that Kaspa ultimately will have a supply of 28.7 billion coins, of which 78% of already mined. So multiplying its price by 1,000 gives a rough estimate on where it is in its price development compared to Bitcoin. Bitcoin was priced at $100 halfway 2013. Kaspa trend lines also converge, and he's talking about here the formula where you have the top and the bottom exponential lines, and they eventually converge. And interestingly enough, they converge at the very year, very close to where Kaspa's block reward goes to 0, basically where no more new inflation's coming in. And that would basically mean that there's just going to be a supply crunch because there's not going to be any more left to mine. So that probably means that Kaspa's price would skyrocket if we ever do get to that point. But he says here, can show us that Kaspa's trend lines intersect around April 2059. Again, that is very close to the moment the last Kaspa is mined, which is around October 2057, as can be seen when looking at the emission schedule. So I want to read these last 2 points he has here. And this paragraph is called Use as a Real Currency. He says Bitcoin itself is less of a threat to governments than Kaspa in the long run, because Bitcoin will never be used as a currency itself due to its limit on transaction speed, max 7 transactions per second. And people that are going to say, hey, the Lightning Network, well, he actually deflects that point right here. He says that's why Bitcoin needs second layer scaling solutions like the Lightning Network. But even Lightning has its limitations. For Lightning to work, a channel needs to be opened after which off-chain transactions can occur. To settle again, an on-chain transaction is needed. Only to onboard 8 billion people on the Lightning Network at 7 people per second, that will take 36 years. And then nobody settled any transactions yet, and Bitcoin was not used for anything other than onboarding people to Lightning. It is suggested to use federations of trusted groups of people that together share settlements, but that concept causes centralization of power gain. Slowly at first, but faster once people forget about the need for self-custody and start trusting bigger and bigger federations with lower overhead costs, since the Bitcoin transaction fee will not always stay this low, which goes against the original idea of Bitcoin. And this is why Kaspa steps into the scene. Kaspa, once up to speed, can do several thousands of transactions per second, close to what centralized payment services like Visa or MasterCard can handle. Adding a scaling layer to such a fast settlement base layer really will enable the original Satoshi Nakamoto vision of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. According to the current Kaspa adoption trend, this will be a vision for the very long term, unless it breaks early to the upside, of course. Let's hope it does. Future year-over-year price growth. Figure 8 shows the year-over-year price growth of the lower trend line of Bitcoin and Kaspa. So not considering price fluctuations within the channel, it gives a rough comparison on the relative growth of adoption between Bitcoin and Kaspa for the coming years. Investing in Kaspa right now is a bit like investing in Bitcoin a few years ago. From 2033 onwards, the lower bound price appreciation of Bitcoin overtakes Kaspa again if the models stay accurate. If so, in 2033, both assets will still yield a decent year-over-year return on investment of around 28%. Not quite so easily achievable with traditional assets. And yeah, if you're still able to get a 28% return year after year, 10 years from now with Kaspa, that's still better than the stock market, which basically only promises you about 10% return year after year. But clearly, Kaspa is going to be doing way more returns if it continues its path that it's going on to right now. So some things that have stemmed off of this power law that was discovered for Kaspa and figuring out that it's actually following this, someone actually made a rainbow chart for Kaspa. And hopefully this will be put on a website so that you can actually kind of play around with it and check it out. But someone did make a rainbow chart for Kaspa here, and he posted it on X. And also a website was made to actually track Kaspa's price and see if it's following the power law predictions. So if you do want to get to this website, I'll have the link down below. I'll also have the link down below to the rainbow chart of Kaspa that someone made. But yeah, this site, you can kind of play around and see the number of days from today to predict a future price. So let's put this out like 800 days or something like that. And you could see that it makes a exponential line based on the power law prediction. You can change it to logarithmic, which kind of is what you should be looking at this table. And you could see that if we're just looking in the future, right now, this is predicting by May 2026, that the price of Kaspa will be about $4.90. Now, obviously, this is not a guaranteed prediction. We don't know if Kaspa will continue to follow this power law, but the thing is, Bitcoin has been following this power law pretty much ever since inception, and it's been pretty accurate. Of course, it's not going to land exactly on these lines. It may be higher, it may be way lower, but the fact is that it's following this trend line. If we bring this back to right now, and we put this in a linear graph, you can see that currently it's not really following the power law perfectly, because over here it kind of just went way higher, which probably just means there was just more greed during that time, and then it crossed over and went lower than the power law, but now it's kind of sitting a little bit higher than where the power law has it. But as you could see, that it's just perfectly trying to follow and stay in line with this trend line based on this power law. So it's really interesting to see if this will continue to play out for the future. I'll probably add this into my news videos to just basically see if it's continuously following this power law and see if it might ever break away from this. But it is very significant that only Kaspa and Bitcoin are the only cryptocurrencies that are following this power law. So So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. And before I go, just want to let you guys know, if you have not gotten a Tantrum card, which is one of the cold storage solutions for Kaspa, I highly recommend you consider getting it. I have videos giving a full-on tutorial of how this Tantrum card works to store your Kaspa offline and keep it off exchanges. If you use my code Kaspa Silver, you can get 10% off at the checkout, and I'll greatly appreciate if you do use that code, because I do receive a commission and it does help support this channel. So thank you guys so much again for watching. Thank you guys for getting us to 8,000 subscribers. We're already at 8,100 subscribers. So thank you guys so much for all that support. Leave a like, subscribe if you guys are new around here. And as always, don't be average, be different.